I've got a surprise for you. A large knife that I forged last week. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan, also known as the Medieval Genie, and today we're going to look at this. A Seax, well, not particularly historically accurate because it's got a full tang instead of a stick tang. It curls to the point rather than going triangular, more straight, and it's my interpretation rather than the historically accurate one, but it's a great blade nonetheless. So I'll show you some test cutting initially, and you can get to see its great efficacy, and then from then on we can, if you still wish to continue, we can have a look at a review of its general features and how it compares to other blades of a similar nature. Okay, so in terms of how this was made, basically I forged it by hand last week. The sorts of tools I used were, of course, different hammers and things to forge it out. I've got a gas-powered propane forge, and the materials used, I'm not 100% sure what wood this is, but I had a log. I used a bandsaw to cut out different slabs, and those made the handle scales on this full tang. I pinned the tang together with these brass pins, 4mm diameter. In terms of the steel, it was originally made from a large file. The length, it was probably about sort of this big or something like that. So I did stretch out a noticeable amount of material, which is actually why I'm a little bit dissatisfied, because it's a bit narrow in the handle, and for something as large as this blade, it feels a little bit on the narrow side, but it still fits securely and doesn't fly out, which is helped a lot by this curved handle, which is something I did deliberately right from the start. Additionally, if you look at the thickness, you'll notice on the wood it's this sort of general knife thickness here, and then it gets much bulkier at the bottom. That again is to stop it from trying to slip out of the hand in every direction. So that helps you to be able to do various cuts and thrusts and, you know, even swinging it wildly, and it doesn't want to just fly out and become an improvised projectile weapon. In terms of its length, if you've seen one of my more recent test cutting videos, you'll be used to this knife. It's just another thing that I forged by hand. Here's a comparison of the length. So let me get a good angle for you. Here we are. So you can see the handles are pretty similar. In fact, it might even be slightly shorter on the knife, as in the small knife, but of course a significantly longer blade. Now, anybody who's watched pretty much any of my test cutting videos will be familiar with this. This is my cold steel 24-inch bladed Latin machete. So here's another comparison to something that might be more familiar. And it was quite a big blade to get in the frame. There we are. So you can see there is a noticeable amount of difference. It's almost double the length on this machete, and this weighs about a pound or so. And this is very light and nimble, which means it can do certain angles for thrusts and cuts without having to do things like half swording. Plus, of course, it thrusts, whereas the machete does not. In terms of the heft, the machete has a noticeable amount more sort of chop, because it's balanced all the way out here. It's almost completely balanced in the middle. Whereas the knife does have a lot of forward weight, but it's balanced here a few inches in front, whereas it's not balanced around here. So it's a bit more back-weighted for more of a nimble manoeuvrability, but yet it's still got that forward weight to slice or chop something wide open. And that is mostly facilitated by the fact that you'll notice on the tip it gets wider on the machete, so it starts narrower next to the handle and then significantly widens, which is just your general machete design. Whereas on a Seax blade, it does the opposite. It narrows and tapers so you can get that sharp point. And it changes the dynamics completely. But it's still, despite the fact that it doesn't lend itself as much to chopping, because the edge geometry is more sudden on this one, on the machete, it's fairly thin to begin with. It's only a few millimeters thick, but it stays completely flat up until a point, and then it's like a hatchet. It sort of stays straight and then suddenly triangulates. So it can take a good edge because it's quite thin, but on this blade it gradually tapers. It's almost completely triangular, and I did a fair amount of grinding to help even that up and make sure it was consistent. So it starts at a much thicker spine. I'll try to give you a close-up here, so you can see all the way along, even right up to the point, it's got quite a thick spine. In fact, let me give a comparison. Yeah, it's thicker about an inch away from the tip on this than anywhere on the entire machete. But yet, because it triangulates towards the edge, it still holds a fine and sharp edge to cut with. So that gives it, again, it's an interesting dynamic, and it's helped a lot when cutting those bottles earlier. In terms of the sorts of grips and things, it handles perfectly fine in a hammer grip, but for some reason, possibly because of the narrow handle, I am often inclined to give it a saber grip. So I put my thumb over on top like that, which lends itself to those sorts of well, moulinet and spin around movements. But really, it handles perfectly fine in anything, despite the fact that it does feel a little bit small in the hand. So yeah, apart from that, I don't know if I've mentioned it, there's this chip here which then broke off. I superglued it back on. It seems to have held fine because that was over a day ago, and now of course I've done all of that chopping and test cutting and hitting it into wood and things, and it's not come loose, it's not come free. It doesn't, it doesn't feel wobbly or kind of squidgy in the glue. It does feel completely solid. So yeah, I'm actually quite happy with it. This temper came out a bit soft. It's not very good on the Rockwell, so the edge tends to roll a bit more than my Machete does. But overall, it's certainly a good, nice blade, even if it does need resharpening more frequently. And I can get the temper better on future blades, especially as I move on to swords. In terms of sword length items, the next item I want to make will probably be a Huntsman Sword. So it'll be a bit similar to this. It'll have a clip point, so it'll curl back a little bit, and then, but it'll also have a concave sort of groove in there, which gives it that sudden sort of point, even though it'll be fairly broad bladed, almost right up to the tip. It'll have actually a curved handle like this, will be fairly realistic for a Huntsman Sword, and more importantly, you'll have a cross guard. And that's going to be something which helps as well. It'll be good for thrust, so it doesn't, because I've used blades like this one in one of my most recent test cutting videos. I thrust, and because it doesn't have a guard on there, I mean, I'd never use a knife this small for parrying, but I figure guards are on there to stop your hand from slipping past. And indeed, my hand did slip past, and I cut my fingers wide open while I was thrusting the bottle, which is not recommended. The curvature and the thickness around here on the front of the grip means it doesn't happen to me, but I reckon if I hit something solid enough, like let's say I was against some armour, or maybe I'd missed and I'd hit something, perhaps I'd gone into some sort of shield, there is a real chance that my hand could slip along and my fingers get cut open again. So having a crossguard will be very useful. Additionally, on the Huntsman Sword, I will try to see if I can put some fullering on there, which are the grooves in the middle, so I can get it even broader than this blade, but yet it won't be significantly heavier, because it'll have that weight taken out of the middle, a bit like sort of I-beams in construction compared to a solid mass of iron. So it's going to be fun. I'm enjoying bladesmithing very much, and thank you for watching. If you've gone this far and have actually listened to me babble about some knife I made in a back garden, comment the number 57 so that I know the usual things. And as always, enjoy. If you have any wishes for certain video topics and things, by all means, request them and I will listen and see what I can do to accommodate. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.